will be talking about from open to tubular surgical outcomes in lumbar disc herniation. Lumbar disc herniations that cause symptomatic radicalopathy are a leading cause of disability, and lumbar discectomy is one of the most commonly performed spine operations worldwide. Among appropriately selected patients, lumbar discectomy often yields excellent clinical results with satisfactory cost effectiveness. While open discectomy has been the standard for years, minimal invasive tubular discectomy offers a less invasive option with potential benefits in recovery time and perioperative outcomes. This study compares the functional, radiological, and perioperative metrics of between the two groups. A prospective study was done, and a function outcome was compared on the basis of VAS score and ODI score. A radiological outcome including the disc height preservation and decompression adequacy and recurrence rate, and perioperative metrics such as operative time, blood loss, and hospital stay. In the inclusion criteria, age between 18 to 65 years was included, single level lumbar disc herniation, and at least 6 weeks of consecutive trial was given. Availability of complete perioperative and postoperative data was included, and minimum 6 months of follow-up. Multi-level disc herniations, recurrent lumbar disc herniation, and instability was excluded. The analysis was done in the three groups: functional, radiological, and perioperative. In the demographic analysis, the mean age between two groups was 45 and 42. The duration of symptoms were around 6 months in both the group. The functional outcome we can see in tubular discectomy, there is a significant amount of VAS score reduction in at 3 months and 6 months, both in the back pain and the leg pain, whereas ODI score is better in the tubular group. Coming to the radiological outcome, the disc height preservation was better in tubular group, with the decompression adequacy not comparative as in both the groups. This is coming to the perioperative matrix, operative time was little more in the tubular group. Blood loss and hospital stay was less. So both open and tubular discectomy demonstrated significant improvements in VAS and ODI score postoperatively. In tubular groups, patients was faster recovery with lower pain score at 6 months, while open discectomy provided more comprehensive decompression, but that was not significant. Radiologically, tubular exhibit better disc height preservation, while open resulted in greater decompression. Tubular discectomy had a shorter, not comparative operative time period, reduced blood loss, and shorter hospital stay as compared to the open. Tubular discectomy offers a promising alternative to open discectomy with quicker recovery time, less blood loss, and superior disc height preservation. However, open discectomy remains advantageous for more complex cases requiring thorough decompression. Both techniques are effective, and the choice should be guided by the patient-specific factors and surgical goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pranay. Can you stay there for a few questions?
So, thank you, Dr. Pranay, for the talk. So, as far as I understood from your talk, there was a point that you said the pain scores with the tubular discectomy were less at 6 months mark as compared to open discectomy. However, if you look at previous literature, most of them will show that this difference in pain scores is lost beyond a few weeks' time. So the great advantage that the tube surgery is going to offer in terms of less pain scores lasts only for a few weeks and not for months. So how do you explain this difference in your study?
So basically in open discectomy, more of we are splitting the muscle, and there we are retracting it. So maybe because of that, the pain score is better in the tubular one.
So this pain difference score usually lasts only for a few weeks' time, not for 6 months. At 6 months, most studies would say that the pain scores are comparable in both groups.
So in our study, actually, we got it like that.
Yeah, I have a question to our panelist. According to his study, I understand that he's saying in more complicated cases, obese patients, it is better to do open because it is, the chances of complication are lesser. But in our experience, we actually see that for those patients, there is an actual difference in results. If we use minimally invasive techniques, MIS techniques, tube decompressions over open discectomies, because there is a lot of difference in the perioperative period, and of course the chances of complications are higher. So what has your experience been in these kind of cases, obese cases, patients redo surgeries and the lot?
I think the tubular surgeries, I mean, whether it's a simple or complex, the learning curve is initially for the few cases is steep. And when we go for the clinical outcome or the radiological outcome, I think the clinical outcome at 6 months or 1 year is in both tubular as well as open is comparable. But the only thing is as Aditya pointed out, initial few weeks, pain-wise, duration-wise, length of stay, I think tubular offers a better advantage over the clinical.
So I agree with what Sir said, that for obese patients it really does make a difference in terms of the soft tissue dissection that you have to do if you have to proceed with open surgery. So in my understanding, obese patients would be my preferred candidates for MIS rather than open procedures.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pranay. We will go on to the next talk on assessment of incidental duro. Dr. Yadu Loknath to give his talk on durotomies.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be talking on our work on assessment of incidental durotomy and its outcome in minimal invasive tubular assisted lumbar spine surgeries. So, incidental dural tear are part and parcel, unpleasant but an expected complication, which has incidence of around 3 to 5% in primary surgeries, with revision surgeries being around 7 to 17% and later being more common. The next big question is, should it be treated in MIS surgeries? The answer is yes, because of the cascading secondary effects and its consequences, which can be as CSF leak, wound dehiscence, meningitis, nerve entrapment, and leading to Fellback syndrome. So there are very few reports on the tubular management of incidental durotomy. So our aim was to discuss the tubular technique of incidental dural tear management, a retrospective analysis of patients who went MIS lumbar surgery, the discectomy, decompressions and fusions were analyzed, patients with incidental dural tears were identified, the morphology of dural tear, location, type of repair performed, and the post-operative course and follow-up was analyzed. So this is how we managed incidental dural tears. The first most important step is identifying dural tear, whether it's a dorsal dural tear or a nerve root sleeve tear. If it's a dorsal dural tear, the primary thing is attempt primary repair. If not confident there's a watertight water leak or CSF leakage, we can always augment with dural patch, then followed by tissue glue. Why? Because sometimes what happens, even if you feel the closure is adequate enough when the patient stands up, because the CSF pressure, the suture can give away if it's not watertight. In non-suturable cases, the definite plan is again a dural substitute. Around the nerve root sleeve, it is always to use a dural substitute rather than taking suture, because the suture can itself have a constricting band sort of thing leading to a nerve entrapment. Moving on to results, there were 1,416 lumbar procedures, which included 775 MIS discectomy, 301 MIS decompressions, and 540 MIS T-leaf, spanning across 1,022 levels, in which 82 levels, that is around 5.05%, had dural tear. The total number of patients was 78, with the male being predominant, and the mean age group was around 59, and the predominant age group was around 61 to 70 years, with primary cases being 67 and recurrent cases being 20. Most dural tears was seen, the incidence was more common in decompression group, around 9.27. There were 69 dural tears at single level, 9 dural tears at 2 levels, ipsilateral being more common and on the approach, that is right side, so there was no role of dexterity here. The location of dural tears were classified based on sagittal plane, lateral, median, paramedian, and the lateral being more commoner, and grade 2 dural tears where there was arachnoid was not intact with plus minus extruded rootlets was more common. Moving on to results further, majority of the cases around grade 2, that was 25 in both gel, were treated with gel foam and Durogen. Exclusive primary repair without no aids of dural agents were done in 4. 18 patients had primary repair with use of dural adjuvants. TCL was used in 9 patients, out of it 7 were grade 3. So all grade 1s were treated with dural tear, and grade 2, as I told, majority was treated with gel foam and Durogen. Complication profile, just one patient had CSF leak on POD4. He was re-explored, Durogen was used, and again TCL was used to augment it. No wound complications, no pre-op symptoms, all pre-op symptoms resolved, and none of the patients were counted in open surgery. To move on, the incidence of MIS dural tear is around 4.5 to 16% as per literature, which our data also shows around 5.05%. Aging is one of the most important factor in the risk of dural tear. Whether how to treat is the next important dilemma. Always, the primary repair is the best, which has the highest rate of access. Is primary repair possible? The answer is always is, which we have stored in our study. What if not? Then there is always placement of a dural patch with or without augmentation of TCL or other dural agents can also be tried. To conclude, incidental durotomy can be managed through tubular means. Primary effective can be done, and the best treatment is prevention of leak. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Loknath. Any questions?
Did any of your patients, you had to use a lumbar subarachnoid drain?
No, none of the patients we used lumbar subarachnoid drain.
Any question from delegates here? Yeah.
Just one question. If you once you have applied your repair procedure, how do you ensure that it is stable and it is leaking? Do you do a Valsalva?
Yes. All patients before closing Valsalva mano is performed.
So a question on this, doing your repair, primary repair through the tube could be very, very challenging. Any tips on how you were able to get your needle pathway?
Yeah, so we use a 6-0 Mersil, which is 3/4 of the circle. With a bayonet handle, even the tip is little curved. So the needle is held at 3/4 of the tip and it's sewn.
And are you able to use two instruments to hold, one to hold the edge of the dura?
Yes. So the assistant usually clears the field if there's CSF leak. The main surgeon takes a bite with the help of a dural tooth.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see that you had not converted any to
No.
open.
Nothing.
That's commendable.
I have a question. So you have a big series of patients. Do you have any case where intraoperatively everything went smooth, but postoperatively patient had some pseudomeningocele or CSF leak symptoms where intraoperatively there was nothing detected?
Unfortunately, we did not, but that is a crux. Using a microscope at a magnification field, there are papers, even when we compared open with regular open surgery without microscope. So microscope helps us in identifying dural tear. So the important message is identify the dural tear intraoperatively if it is there and treat it. So we didn't have anything later of that sort.
Yes, Dr.
Can I make a comment?
Yes,
Yeah. Definitely once you get experience with the tubular, as I said yesterday with the tubular, you don't need to convert into open. If you convert into open, chances of pseudomeningocele and CSF like more because you're creating more space there. Because you have done a tubular, the space, muscles have already got approximated. The negative pressure will not be there, so the chances of pseudomeningocele are much, much less. Even if there is a dural tear, you are not able to suture as well. If you can just take a muscle patch there, lay it over it, plus or minus, you can take a dural substitute and TCL, things will be done. All the literature clearly says that don't convert into open. Your chances of pseudomeningocele is much more if you convert into open. You can do it through this.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
One more question.
Yeah.
When do you ambulate your patients?
In case of decompressions and microdiscectomy, the same evening. If still if depending upon the open, either same evening or next day. No change in, always patient has a drain, means though the negative section is minimum, patients are mobilized the same day, no change in antibiotic prophylaxis. Patients are again sent in case of decompressions and MLD the next day, infusions 1 or 2 days extra because of pain and other things. No change in protocol from the base policy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll go on to the next talk, Dr. Srinivas Prabhu, to discuss on muscle preserving decompression, single level lumbar canal stenosis. Very, very big, long topic. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. So the topic is muscle preserving decompression. We are comparing the spinous process splitting technique with the over-the-top decompression, that is the microendoscopic decompression. The aim of any muscle preservation surgery in lumbar decompression is to decrease intraoperative blood loss, post-operative pain, and to decrease the amount of hospital stay. And the key to this is that we preserve the paraspinal muscles, mainly the multifidus muscle and the posterior ligamentous complex. So to achieve this, there are a number of techniques, 2 of which we primarily studied. The over-the-top decompression was initially introduced for discectomy by Foley and Smith in 97, but then improved upon by Palmer in 2002. So it is a unilateral laminectomy for a bilateral decompression using tubular retractors. Whereas the spinous process splitting came in by Watanabe in 2005, it is a midline approach where instead of cutting the insertion, you actually split the spinous process at the spinolaminar junction and allow the muscles to retract with each half of the spinous process. The aim of our study, we analyzed retrospective data and compared these two techniques. A total of 50 patients were assessed from operated between 2015 to 2020 at our hospital. We only took in patients who had a primary lumbar decompression surgery at a single level. We excluded anything that had instability, any instrumentation, any revision decompression, tandem stenosis, and a single surgeon performed all these procedures. The data collection involved age of the patient, sex of the patient, level of decompression, the duration that it took for surgery, the amount of intraoperative blood loss. Post-operatively, we assess the duration of hospitalization, any complications, and follow-up scores, VAS scores, and Japanese Orthopaedic Society score at 1 year follow-up versus pre-op were assessed. So over-the-top decompression technique is primarily a unilateral laminotomy. It depends, the most important step is the needle placement at the spinolaminar junction. After that, the muscles are sequentially dilated and a tubular retractor is placed. The laminotomy is initially performed at the inferior edge of lamina. We do an ipsilateral laminotomy, and then the tube is tilted towards the surgeon and the table is tilted to the opposite side to visualize the base of the spinous process, which is then burred, and then a contralateral laminectomy and facetectomy is performed, and then the decompression is completed. Whereas in spinous process splitting approach, you go through a standard midline approach, same as a conventional laminectomy, but instead of cutting the spinous process, a burr is used to drill, split the spinous process longitudinally right up to the base at the spinolaminar junction, and then curved osteotomes are used to break the spinous process. And then the muscles that lie on top of the lamina are sequentially dissected using a Cobb's elevator, and then the standard steps of laminectomy are performed. This table is the summary of the results that we got. Most of our patients were in the age group of 60 to 70 years. There was no gender predominance as such. All the patients that we could find had undergone surgeries at L34, L45 and L5S1. The most significant difference in the two techniques was found in the surgical time. In microendoscopic decompression, the surgical time was almost 30 minutes more compared to what happens in spinous process splitting. And even though the intraoperative blood loss was less with over the top, it was not significant. However, there was a significant difference in the amount of hospital stay that we found. 3 patients in the over the top group and 2 patients in spinous process splitting had a dural tear, but they did not require a revision surgery according to the data. In terms of clinical outcome, both categories of patients had improvement in VAS score as well as significant improvement in the job PQ score. Coming to the discussion part of it, in treating lumbar spinal stenosis, both these techniques have been used a lot. In our study, the main difference was that the mean operative time was significantly longer in microendoscopic discectomy. We attribute it to the smaller working channel and instrument maneuverability. And the mean hospital stay was significantly shorter with MED, probably as a result of earlier mobilization even for elderly patients in this technique. MED has a longer learning curve, but there is no evidence in terms of meta-analysis to suggest that the complication rates are more. Both the groups showed significant improvement. In the past, there have been some studies by Liu et al. And Rajshekharan which have compared conventional laminectomy with either of these techniques, and they have said that there is no significant difference in the VAS score.